This is The Strange Recital, a podcast about fiction which questions the nature of reality.
Like life, a watch provides complications to keep it interesting. Watanabe sat cross-legged on a low stage while we sat packed around him, students at the feet of a high-art Socrates, all leaning forward to hear his surprisingly delicate voice. His first name was Sam, but the world knew him only as Watanabe. Dressed in black, his long hair dangling in black-gray strands, he looked like an aging heavy metal drummer. Or he could be a mononoke, as Watanabe's many detractors described him, a demon spirit. Back at the agency, we had done some initial research on Watanabe. He was a political artist who worked with extreme materials, like decommissioned jets and tsunami debris. He wasn't as well known or revered as Banksy or Ai Weiwei. Watanabe was a restless provocateur, a thumb in the eye of the world. Hearing him talking about something as tame as an old-school watch sounded out of character. But confounding expectations seemed to be Watanabe's specialty. A woman with pink-streaked blonde hair and red-framed glasses slipped into the Okutama Institute's conference room and slid into the empty seat next to me. "Flight from L.A. was late as usual," she whispered, shrugging off her coat. "I'm Renata," she said, "senior editor at Art Forum." "Ko," I said, "from Moriawase." She tilted her head. "Ad agency." She leaned closer. "What did I miss?" "Introductions, green tea, non-disclosure agreements, awkward small talk. Watanabe just started." "So glad." She pressed her palms together in thanks. "His work is fabulous, don't you think?" Renata didn't wait for an answer, just leaned forward to get a better view of Watanabe. Her pale face blossomed with star-struck rapture. "The usual complications of a watch are actually quite uncomplicated," Watanabe said. "Phases of the moon, a chime on the half-hour. In this way, even the most expensive watch is still simple enough to be used by a child. They are all pretty little toys." He raised his glinting obsidian eyes to scan his rapt audience. Life can be seen as a plaything as well. Watanabe seemed to pause when he found me, an interloper among the invited guests from the art press and the watch industry. But this perception ignores the... He leaned over to Yoji, his handsome young assistant, who whispered in his ear, "Ignores the verities," Watanabe said. "The unrelenting truths, like the soul, truth, courage, death." He turned toward me, his eyes seeking mine, no mistaking it. "The advertisements for these expensive toys make it sound as if each owner is simply taking care of his watch for..." Watanabe's brow wrinkled. "For the next generation," I blurted, because I hated those ads, and the long flight had left me jangled. Yoji turned and glared at the advertising guy who had broken Watanabe's incantatory spell with his American impertinence. Renata shifted away from me. Watanabe seemed untroubled. "Exactly. For the next generation. As if an object could be a legacy. But let me be very clear about this, my friends. No object is a legacy, no matter how beautiful and well-crafted. Not a watch or an expensive sports car." He gave a small smile. "Not even works of art. What is the true legacy that we will leave?" No one blurted out an answer. "The only legacy we leave is the memory of our actions," Watanabe said. "What we did each day and why we did it. For those who choose to remember us, we leave behind these small traces as our gift." He paused, shook his head slowly. "Or warning." He raised his hand and snapped his fingers as if summoning a waiter. The doors at the back of the conference room opened, and the engineers wheeled in a metal cart. They raised a white cloth cover to reveal a glass case the size of a small aquarium. Inside it glimmered the mysterious watch that my agency was hoping to launch. The emails from Watanabe's team had called it the most revolutionary watch ever created. Having written plenty of hype during my career, I considered myself immunized. I came to Tokyo to be convinced. Meet Cassius 7, my friends. Years in research and development, now revealed to you, the select few. Eager nodding among the audience, Renata stared with unrestrained enthusiasm. To me, Cassius 7 looked like any other elegant, understated watch. Its round case held a matte silver face with tapered black hands. The hours were in delicate Roman numerals. The only unusual detail was a small red dot glowing on its band. Looks like any other expensive watch, doesn't it? Watanabe said, reading my mind. It is intentional. We are hiding its light under a bushel basket. He spoke the words slowly, as if he had just learned the folksy expression, and it delighted him. One of the engineers inched across the low stage, carrying a bowl of apples in front of him. Watanabe gave an appreciative nod, chose an apple, and held it up to us. Temptation, yes? But this is not the Garden of Eden, and we are not innocents. Watanabe nodded, and the engineers lifted the glass case. He plucked the watch from its stand and held it in the air, pivoting so everyone could see. Watanabe turned to the engineers. Thanks to our team for years of exploration and hard work, leading to this first demonstration of the prototype. The engineers bowed humbly. Watanabe fastened the watch gently around the apple. Once the watch is on, it cannot be removed. He pointed to the band, which had tightened around the apple, then to a small red 1 glowing on the band. Our watch counts the days you have been wearing it, reminding you to be thankful for each. Watanabe put the watch-bound apple on the stand, and the engineers lowered the case around it like a reliquary. He nodded to one of the engineers bent over a laptop, who began typing furiously. Nothing happened. The engineer stopped and looked up. Watanabe gave a small smile. Much of life is spent waiting. The engineer began slap-typing, but again, nothing happened. My eyes strayed to the conference room windows. In the formal gardens, a breeze set red maple leaves quaking. The laptop pounding continued until it triggered a brief whirring, then silence. I looked back at the stage to find that the case had turned white. Pulverized apple coated the inside of the case. A slow drip of juice trickled down, then another. I had no idea what had just happened. Unsettled murmuring rippled through the conference room. The engineers lifted the case to show us the gleaming watch covered in clumps of apple pulp now, but intact. Yoji stood and shouted in Japanese. Watanabe's cohorts in the audience jumped up and applauded. We stood and joined the applause as the engineers bowed, then took away the case. Giving a watch a standing ovation seemed excessive, but again, I was unmoved by the fine watch world, and I had no idea what the stunt with the apple was all about. Watanabe walked to a small table and waved his hand over a low black box, summoning up a hologram of Cassius 7. Let us take a closer look. He waved his fingers near the slowly spinning image, and the watch enlarged. Cassius 7 is an exceptionally accurate watch. Fully jeweled movement, titanium case, sapphire bezel, small ruby inlaid above each numeral. It has all of the elements of a great watch, with none of the gaudiness of a Bulgari or a Patek, or the cloying attention demanded by a Rolex. It looks understated. As he spoke, Watanabe spun the image of the watch to reveal its ordinariness from all angles. To be truly radical, you have to appear normal, he said with a smile, so you can cause more trouble. Renata opened a small red notebook to capture this insight, as much about the artist as his latest creation. Watanabe spun the image to reveal the bottom of the shimmering titanium case, engraved with a series of numbers in a circle. Notice that each watch is unique and numbered. A serial number is not unusual. But here, beneath the watch, the singular beauty of Cassia 7 becomes dear. His hand hovered over the hologram to start an animation. The bottom of the case opened, and a tiny silver crescent emerged from the underbelly of the watch, then another, then more. They spun slowly, then in a blur, as Watanabe watched, transfixed. Here we see the 7 blades, each honed until they are sharp as scimitars, he said. One by one the blades emerge from the underside of the watch and pierce the wearer's wrist without warning, at random. He uttered this incomprehensible detail without explanation, then looked up. You see, the blades slip down between the delicate bones of the wrist, then spin to sever the ulnar artery, causing violent exsanguination, or, more bluntly, death, in seconds. The crowd turned silent, then burst into an uneasy laughter. Watanabe smiled. It might seem like a joke to you, but to us, Cassia 7 is a very serious business, as you will see. The laughter stopped. I texted Nathan back at the agency. Watanabe product demo just got super weird. Oh, come on, a woman shouted from the audience. Why would you create a watch that does such a terrible thing? The speaker stood, and I recognized her from the meet and greet before the presentation. Milo Desprez, executive VP of a French luxury goods conglomerate. Watanabe smiled at her. Because death is the ultimate complication. A deadly watch? That's what you brought us here to see? She glared at the gently spinning hologram of Cassia 7 as if outraged by its existence. Your watch is absurd. Who would want it? Watanabe focused his heavy gaze on the questioner. There's a market and a price for everything. You certainly know that, Madame Desprez. He held up a long, graceful finger and pointed at Cassia 7. Here is something else that you need to understand. The soul of the watch, as it were. So your monstrous watch has a soul? The conference room turned hot and airless as the demonstration veered into uncertain territory. Yes, this watch has a soul. Why should so-called sentient beings be the only bearers of souls? A heckler can throw off a pitch, but Watanabe seemed to relish Madame Desprez's badgering. The sun has a soul, the moon, temples, streets, gardens. They resonate with all that has passed through them, all that they know. What can a watch know? It's just a stupid little machine. This watch is far from stupid, Madame Desprez. Only it knows the answer. To what question? When will you die? A moment of stunned silence from the room. Madame Desprez shrugged her narrow shoulders. How can a watch know such a thing? An algorithm, trained for maximum variability, determines the moment when the knives will emerge. You mean the moment of death? Or life? Watanabe paused, tilted his head. You see, the knives may come out in a week, a year, 20 years, or they may not appear at all. The supposedly deadly watch may end up just being a beautiful toy, like its high-end cousins. The wearer never knows what's going to happen or when, just like we never know our fate. Watanabe's dark eyes scanned the conference room, drawing us all in. When you go to sleep at night, will you wake to live another day? When you walk down the street, will you inhale a deadly virus? Or get shot by a fanatic? Do any of you truly know the answer? Silence. Hoping was different than knowing. In this way, the watch parallels our own precarious existence. Some claim to be able to predict death, from genetic researchers to astrologers. But we must live with uncertainty. We query Google. We ask Alexa, where should we travel? What restaurant should we go to? But the ultimate question, the one so rarely asked and never answered, is simple. When will I die? So we are supposed to believe that your ridiculous watch will determine the answer? Madame Desprez was having none of it. Instead of? She said nothing, not citing the usual suspects: fate, luck, God. We determine our own destinies and our own deaths. Watanabe wiggled his fingers like a puppeteer pulling hidden strings. We court or repel death every day by what we do and how we live. Some put themselves at risk by racing motorcycles or base jumping from mountains, or they smoke and eat too much, as I do. Others try to extend their lives with exercise and strict diets. But that's our choice, Madame Desprez said. It still is, Watanabe said. We won't put the watch on our customers like a shackle. They will choose to wear the watch, or not. No one but a fool would decide to put on such a deadly thing. Done arguing, Madame Desprez smoothed her elegant black skirt and sat down. Watanabe smiled. Fortunately, the world is thick with fools. The secret preview of Watanabe's creation devolved into a technical session run by the unsmiling engineers. Somber in their black suits and white shirts, they turned even more serious, as if to distract us from the Cassius 7's troubling complication. One of the engineers walked through the crowd, solemnly gathering our cell phones in a basket, lest we try to photograph proprietary technology. Then they walked us through the design of Cassius 7, drowning us in details. I set aside the question of the watch's uncertain purpose and took notes on its innovations. The random timing of the emergence of the blades, the anodized beryllium that kept them sharp for years, if necessary. My work required understanding complicated machines and arcane tech, at least enough to sell them, so I was all too familiar with product demonstrations, trade shows, and R&D labs. But after listening to the monophonic voices of the engineers lecturing us, no questions allowed, even I started to fade. Jet lag set my mind adrift. I stared out the window at the gardens, raked with amber beams of afternoon light. Dragonflies hovered over plum blossoms and pale blue wisteria. I imagined how free they felt flitting around the Institute grounds. Around me, the other guests in the overheated conference room were squirming like kindergartners. Sensing our escalating boredom, the engineers announced a brief break. We rose quickly to cluster around the tea table and started talking in urgent whispers. The more literal-minded in the group, including the outspoken Madame Desprez, considered Cassius 7 a dangerous toy. If it's real, it's despicable, she said. If it's simply a joke, it is not funny in the least. The response from most of the other guests, half smiles and whispers, hinted at skepticism. Neil de Vries, whose name tag identified him as the editor of Het Moderne Horloge in Amsterdam, proposed that we were just part of an elaborate prank, one that Watanabe would explain at some point. I must say, even if it's all just for a laugh, we need someone like Watanabe to shake up the watch world, he said, his eyes sparkling. Or to destroy us all, Madame Desprez sipped her coffee. I feel as if we are witnessing something truly historic, said Martin Sorgen, an art dealer from Copenhagen. Even if it's just a prank, the mere concept of a weaponized accessory is sublimely subversive. Everything Watanabe creates is sublime, added the besotted Renata. Sorgen nodded. He's taking us into uncharted territory. Dangerous territory, said Madame Desprez, refusing to give in to groupthink. Her dissent did little to quell the excitement we felt as insiders in Watanabe's latest art project. We huddled close, shocked by the audacity of the Cassia 7. A tagline popped into my head: "The only watch that kills time." I would have to do better than that. Watanabe walked back on the low stage, holding up his arms like a street preacher, waving us back to our seats. He waited silently for our whispering to stop. "You have heard about the inner workings," Watanabe shook his head slowly. "These details are important, but they are not what you will remember about this day." He nodded toward the engineers, who carried another case toward the low stage. They lifted the black cover to reveal a small white rabbit in the center of the case. Its eyes were red, its pink nose twitched, and a cinched silver watch glimmered around its neck. A rabbit wearing a watch like a necklace. The sight of it was so absurd that we had to smile, to laugh even. But we fell quiet one by one as we remembered the apple. Some in this room consider this project a prank intended to outrage, to get attention. Believe me, Cassia 7 is not a joke. Not at all. Watanabe nodded at one of the engineers, and the inside of the case splashed red instantly, blood dripping down the glass in a slow rain. The watch gleamed at its bottom, its work completed, titanium clotted with dark viscera and pale bone. The rabbit's quick death left us stunned. Renata clutched my arm. Some shouted, others looked away as if they could pretend it didn't happen. We all looked at Watanabe for an explanation. Was he a heartless sadist? Or just the latest creator to fall in love with his creation? Watanabe's hands were clasped together, head bowed toward the bloodied case in respect for the untethered soul drifting from its eviscerated remains. Madame Desprez rose from her seat. "You are unspeakably vile and cruel." Her voice was loud, clear, angry. "I want no part of this disaster." Watanabe opened his eyes and watched Madame Desprez's quick path toward the door, unconcerned by the disruption. He seemed to welcome it. A small smile played on his face, then faded. "You sell beauty products that kill thousands of rabbits every year, slowly and painfully, during so-called animal testing." Watanabe's voice was loud and firm, eyes narrowed. "But you cannot witness the painless sacrifice of one well-tended rabbit?" Madame Desprez turned at the exit but said nothing, silenced by Watanabe's blistering gaze. "Perhaps it is you who is unspeakably cruel." Watanabe raised his hand, tallying her sins on his graceful fingers. 50 million euro in profit last quarter, yes? For handbags of leather stripped from the carcasses of calves and goats, clothing stitched in Indonesian sweatshops, diamonds mined by shoeless slaves. The door slammed behind Madame Desprez like a rifle shot.
That was an excerpt from the novel Death Watch, written by Stona Fitch and narrated by Fred Stelling.
Hello, Stona. Welcome to the Strange Recital.
Great to be here, Brent. Tom, thanks for inviting me to be here.
Well, thanks for coming. Now, you have quite a strong track record as a novelist, especially if by you, I mean both your identities. So, tell us a bit about who you are.
Just both identities? I contain multitudes. I mean, there's so many.
I think 2 will do it.
Okay. Well, under my own name, Stona Fitch, which sounds like a pen name, but is actually my name. I've written 7 novels. My 7th novel is Death Watch. I started out as a journalist. I was the editor of my college paper and my high school paper and my camp paper. I just really like to write journalism. But I switched over to fiction because I like to make things up, and that's not really popular in daily journalism. Well, it happens a lot, but it's not supposed to. And I love to tell a story. And I studied fiction with Joyce Carol Oates and Russell Banks at Princeton. I was lucky enough to meet them when I was 19 and just stuck with it. And I would say that I like to explore different genres under the name Rory Flynn because I needed to be more Boston Irish. I wrote a couple crime novels that are more flat out crime novels. They are called Third Rail and Dark Horse. And those came out with Houghton Mifflin. So I've also written things that are lighter and more comedic, but in general, my books tend to be a balance of light and dark.
Well, Death Watch came out about a year ago, and we just heard the opening chapter. So without any spoilers, can you give us a summary of the rest of the book?
Sure. Death Watch, like its title, is about a watch that could kill you. I always like to take an idea to its sort of illogical extreme, and high-end watches are just sort of this crazy other world. I'm not a watch guy, and through some work I had done, I was exposed to this high-end watch world, and I found it fascinating. So the fiction is that there is a watch that you put it on, and it stays on. And in a day, a week, a year, or never, and that's important, the watch kills you. It kills you with a series of knives that sever an important artery in your wrist. So the book centers on a few key questions. The first is, who could sell this watch? Our main character is an ad guy. How do you come up with an ad campaign to sell potential death? Who would buy it? Why would someone buy something that could kill them? Although people buy cigarettes, people buy all sorts of stuff that could kill them. And why would they buy it? What would lead them to think they needed to pay $50,000 for a glittering piece of death, potential death? And that's important. So those themes play out a lot. And then behind it all is the real question for the reader, which is answered at some point. Is this real, or is it just a hoax?
This first chapter goes rather quickly from light to dark. I wonder if the novel itself has raised any objections from the literary world, similar to the way The Lethal Watch raised objections in the story. Of course, your novel doesn't kill its readers. Or does it?
I'll pass on that question. You never know. I mean, fiction is rarely fatal, put it that way. I think that if I stayed within one tone, that Death Watch might have been more seen as a conventional thriller. But the fact that I like to mix it up and I have trouble coloring within the lines makes it, I'd like to think, a more intriguing book. The New York Times review of it pointed out that it's really not a normal thriller. It's, as they call it, a cerebral inquiry into the sheer nihilistic idiocy of the modern condition. That doesn't really sound like there's jet airplanes and paratroopers and black ops. It's not that kind of thriller. But I think the back and forth between dark and light makes it thrilling because you're off balance as a reader. And I'm certainly off balance as a writer. It keeps you thinking, like, am I laughing? Is this worrisome? Should I be worried? It's in a way that I think parallels the way people behave in life. You know, you're never sort of one mood. And I'd like to think that light and dark sort of meld a bit and people go back and forth, but ideally enjoy the back and forth.
Well, I like the way you used a jaded advertising man as a narrator in order to indict the advertising industry. But as I see it, you're also indicting the conceptual art world and the wealthy and, in fact, our whole insanely consumerist culture. Nobody escapes. It's indictments all around.
Well, the modern world is a target-rich environment for a satirist. The line between fact and fiction has been so blurred that I don't think there is one. You read a news story, and you just can't believe that that's real. And then, fiction has to, I think, mirror that by making it clear that there's a lot of things to explore, and some of them are absurd. I think rather than poking fun at something, which I think is just like throwing a rock, I want to help expose the absurdity of it and let us all enjoy that.
It seems that a watch that kills its wearer could be a stand-in for other technologies. So you're pointing toward big tech and the world of ever-advancing digital devices, robotics, AI, virtual reality, innovations making people incredibly rich, all sold in the name of convenience, efficiency, entertainment. Are you a bit of a Luddite in disguise?
The dark secret is I love technology, and I've spent my whole life writing about it for my profession, as it were, that supports my fiction habit. So I'm a closet mechanical engineer. I love the way things work. I love advances in technology, and I'm a science nerd. But every technology comes with a certain amount of hype that you have to look behind, like AI now. And there's a certain amount of truth to it, and you have to sort of seek out, is this necessary? Is this something the world needs? Or is it just something that we cooked up in the lab? And a lot of technologies are foisted on the public in a way that makes people feel like they're indispensable. A lot of technologies are very dispensable. And if you ever take a walk in the woods and don't take your phone, you realize, I don't need any of that stuff.
Right.
So I think it's the dependence on technology that I have issue with. I think it's important to remain, in any way you can, independent.
I'd second that.
Yes. Now, in the book, Watanabe takes a stand against what he calls the absurdity of end-time capitalism, and he claims to be conducting a social experiment to illuminate the ways that humans act against their own best interest. That is definitely observable in our culture, maybe most visibly when it comes to voting, but I won't get into that. It turns out that the market for the death watch is mostly young, wealthy, disillusioned men, the new nihilists. Is that a category you made up, or is it a real thing?
That's a good question. It is an actual thing. And I read a new nihilist essay, a very academic piece, but then I did some looking online, and it was used back in the 60s, too, to describe people's issues. And in fact, there was just a piece, I just looked it up a moment ago to check something, and the current generation is embracing futility and meaninglessness. So that's pretty nihilistic, right? And I think that the pressures of the current culture and the ominous presence of climate change and potential destruction are exerting a downward force on a lot of different groups. And young men who I think used to think they had the world, by the tail, are being forced to rethink that. And part of it is, you've got guys that live in apartments in Japan and never leave, and you've got incels, which are in the book, and you've got different disenfranchised groups. And I think that those disenfranchised groups naturally gravitate towards something extreme, whether it's political extremism or religious extremism or consumer extremism by buying ridiculous stuff for lots of money, or by buying a watch that could possibly kill them.
Yeah. This is a book that's full of interesting ideas about our current culture and about human nature. Too many for the time we have available. So if you had to pick a central philosophical statement from the book, maybe your favorite, what would it be?
Well, it is a novel with a lot of themes and a lot of points of view and a lot of things that I like to leave the reader with a lot of questions versus answers. And they can kind of choose their own quote-unquote message. But in writing it, I think what guided me and what I keep coming back to now that it's been a while is just the importance of being human, the importance of questioning your activities as an individual. All we are is this, Watanabe says this at one point, we're all just this collection of actions and words that we've said. And, you constantly have to ask yourself, why? Why am I doing that? Why am I acting that way? Why am I buying this? Why am I doing that? And I think just being more aware versus having your actions dictated by other forces, by marketing, by advertising, by cultural norms. I said it before, be more human. Everything that we need is within us. And I think that it's important to remember that you have to trust your intuition and your own internal compass more than any other directive.
By the way, I'm curious. Does the name Watanabe come from that Japanese philosophy or way of being?
I don't know. I chose it because I did some work for a camera company in Japan, and I worked for 3 guys whose last name was Watanabe.
Okay.
And I had to figure out which ones they were. And there was a good one, a bad one, and an indifferent one. And it stuck in my head. It just rolled off my tongue, and I thought, Watanabe. And, choose names. Sometimes I'll walk around a city and I'll realize, oh, that's where I got that name. It's from a store. You pick them up, and I try not to make them too emblematic, although the main character's name has some thought that went into it. But the Watanabe is, I think it's a very common Japanese name.
So it's not Watanabe. I can't quite place it. It's lurking in one of my hemispheres. But it describes a concept or an aesthetic of imperfection.
Yeah, you're talking about wabi-sabi. Yeah.
Oh, wabi-sabi, right.
Yeah. Yes.
Similar but different.
Yeah.
By the way, Stona, I'm curious about your research. You seem to know a lot about the inside workings of advertising agencies. Is that a former job of yours, or did you have to do new research?
Well, I would say that, it used to be a sin to admit that you have a job and you're a writer. You're supposed to just be in the woods writing. But now I think most people know the woodshop writer is a myth, and you got to figure out a way to, that makes your book very hard to read. If you're starving when you're writing, it may be a good myth, but it's just not much fun. And if the book's not fun for you to write, it won't be fun for anybody to read. And so for a long time, I've worked in what I would call advertising adjacent work. I founded a small agency in Cambridge, co-founded it in the 80s, and grew it into a business where we did work for technology firms. So very similar to this. And I pulled from that experience, even though I'm not part of that now. I do work with technology companies to help them tell their stories in their advertising and marketing, tell them clearly. And I think that's still something that writers are really able to do that AI can do part of, but humans are able to really add the lived experience part of it that AI can't. So I would say I've spent my time around it and in it, and I've definitely been front and center and watching a lot of agencies at work. And I pulled from that. I haven't written about it directly before. It's in my first novel a little bit, in a novel called Strategies for Success, but which sounds like a business book, but it's not. This material works in the context of this idea because someone did have to try to sell it. It's got to be an unusual agency. And the agency in my book is very unusual.
I understand you also have a musical background. You played in a Boston-based band on the fringes of punk rock, similar to what I did in London. Does your musical experience influence your writing in any way?
Yeah, it does. I was in a country punk band based in Boston called Scruffy the Cat.
Nice name.
Which is a funny name.
Yeah.
And I loved being in the band. I did it for about 4 years. We played 750 shows in that time, pretty much. And we traveled all over the U.S. Didn't get to London, but we played it in London, Ontario. And, we just toured around in a van the way you could back then, pre-internet, and stapled up posters and played in bars and colleges and opened for the Replacements and Los Lobos and the Blasters and the Cramps. We did a lot of hard indie rock touring. And I think that experience made me really appreciate being alone.
Yeah.
It made me appreciate that you don't have to carry amplifiers to write a book, and you don't have to be with 5 guys all the time to write a book. You just have to be in your own head, which can have its own issues, but not having the constrained environment that is a touring band. I love doing it, but I was really glad when it was over. I listen to music when I write, and I hear music in my head, and I still write songs. So it's definitely part of it, just to put things in the right order in a way that works for the ear. I read all my stuff out loud to make sure it works. I do come back to it a lot, and I love music.
Well, I want to acknowledge a very admirable project that you've been running for quite a long time. Tell us about the Concord Free Press.
Sure. The Concord Free Press is a side project that I'm involved with, that I helped found with my wife, Anne, and designer Christy Francesco, and about a dozen other writers and designers and editors and people. And our whole deal is really simple. We publish new fiction or new books, and in small editions, and we give them away for free to any reader that asks for one, and ask only that they do something generous or give money to something they care about, a cause they care about, and then pass the book on so the whole process keeps going. We've been doing this 15 years. We've published dozens of books, and it's inspired more than $6 million in charity.
Wow.
Throughout the world, which is what people have told us about. I would think there's a lot more than that, and a lot of really interesting acts of generosity. So if traditional publishing is about creating great art and intriguing stories and getting them to an audience and ideally making some money from that, ours is really simple. We exist for one reason, which is to inspire generosity among readers. And it's been a hugely interesting project that turns an ancient idea, the gift economy, as written about by Lewis Hyde in his book, The Gift, into a model for publishing that no one else has done. And publishing is fun when you don't have to.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I loved publishing. I love editing. I love putting out books. And people respond. From the start, it was clear we had hit a nerve. It was just like, wow, a new way to think about what a book is. And people pass books by hand anyway, so it takes advantage of the way the tangible book works. Mm-hmm. And we've got a new one that's just on its way. And if any reader wants to find out more about the Concord Free Press, we will be glad to send you a book. It's just ask for one at concordfreepress.com.
Great.
So what are you up to these days, aside from talking to us? In the realm of writing, I mean.
The Free Press has a book coming out, as I mentioned, so that's a publishing project. But I've got a dark novel set back in Oklahoma that I'm working on, based on some dark family lore I just found out. And I've got also a much lighter personal narrative that I'm writing, trying to not write a memoir, but write a series of the kind of stories I tend to tell in bars, and tack them all together and make it funny. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm working on, those two things.
Well, that sounds good.
We'll see, won't we?
Yeah. Well, Stona, that's it for now. Thank you for joining us, and best of luck to you and to Rory with this one and your future books.
Yes, thank you.
You bet. Thank you, guys. And the strange recital, may it continue ahead.
Yes.
Thank you.
You know, when I moved to Woodstock from the big city, I threw away my cheap wristwatch, which sort of felt like it was killing me. I guess I thought I could reject time. What a delusion.
Well, I see you still have the wrist it was on. You know, I wonder sometimes about the future of nihilism. This is The Strange Recital, on the web at thestrangerecital.com. The music on this episode was Traffic Chaos by XJ5000. This is episode 24031.